Well, good morning, Pat. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Doug?
I'm doing well. I hope your weekend's off to a good start. Well, this is pretty much the start, actually.
Sure.
But anyway, understand you got some cold weather up there in Michigan. I can't say we do here in Tampa Bay, but it's a pleasant 80 degrees anyway this morning. Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing about the lessons you've learned about the board superintendent partnership in 3.5 or so
hmm
years
Yeah,
at the helm of the Bloomfield Hills Schools in Michigan. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us a bit about your career, some highlights of your career up to now, and also paint a picture of the Bloomfield Hills Schools in a nutshell, if you would.
sure. Yeah. So, almost a full 30 years in education, and I really feel like I had the opportunity to do it all and experience everything. I was a longtime teacher. I taught in the classroom for 16 years. I was the department head. Had the opportunity to get involved in tons of curriculum writing, which I really enjoy to this day. Served as a high school athletic director, assistant principal, and then finished my career for now as superintendent of Bloomfield Hills Schools. And uh, came in at kind of an interesting time. I started there in January of 2020, and after 59 days, counting weekends on the job, we shut schools. And then it
Mm.
was kind of an interesting situation, kind of moving forward. Really proud of the work we did there as a team. We did a lot of great things. One of the things that was really interesting is when schools shut, we formed this international consortium.
Now
So
you're
we,
talking COVID when you say shut
I'm
down.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm talking COVID, 100% talking COVID. Being a new superintendent at the time, I was a little naive. It was like, oh, we're only going to be out for 2 weeks, and 2 weeks turned into months and months and months. But we were really fortunate that we were able to get ahead of the curve. I was really proud of the work we did with, we actually created this international consortium of schools. So we worked with schools from Denmark, from Germany, from South Korea, from Japan, and from Israel. And they were kind of ahead of the curve with COVID. And so they shared quite of great advice with us. Long story short, we were able to implement a ton of their ideas. So actually coming out of COVID, when we looked at, it's only one data point, but our standardized test scores, our students actually performed better coming out of COVID than they did before COVID.
Whoa, that bucked the national trend for
It
sure.
did. And we really focused on math and ELA and kind of put a lot of other things off to the side. Just kind of heeded that advice. We were able to also pass a $200 million bond, um, which was fantastic. It allowed us to redo catchment areas, kind of right size the school district, really improve the facilities, and the bond accounted for more than all the other bonds passed in the history of the school district, which
Whoa.
was kind of neat. So, a little bit about Bloomfield Hills. It's a suburban school district, about 5,500 students, extremely high achieving school district, very unique in that, as a district, we operate a 100-acre farm in the middle of the suburbs and a 58-acre nature center. So, kind of imagine the suburban area. We all know what those look like, but then there's opportunity to go on a farm or go to the nature center as part of your educational experience. And it's also open for the community. So very, very, appreciative for the journey I was able to have in education, and look forward to, what might be next. Because there's, still that desire to continue working and seeing where the next opportunity and the next journey and adventure might take place.
Well, I'm sure you've got a fascinating career ahead in education. Uh, Now, why don't our subject today is lessons you've learned about the board superintendent partnership from the perspective of the superintendency at Bloomfield Hills Schools. Before we look at the board as a whole, though, tell us a bit about the partnership with your board presidents. You had what, two board presidents over Uh,
Let me see it. There's one, two, three. I had four.
4 board presidents. Okay. So tell us about that relationship. How did you approach building a relationship with your board presidents? What did you learn about that experience
Right.
or from that experience?
Well, I learned that, each board president is extremely unique and
Mm.
has very different priorities and very different passions. So it wasn't a uniform approach that, they all had the same thing they were passionate about or wanted to see happen or thought was the direction the school district might, should, or could take moving forward. So I tried to schedule a lot of one-on-one meetings. I always had quarterly meetings with all the board members, but typically with the board president, I would touch base every week, week and a half, especially prior to board meetings, to make sure we were all moving on the same page and kind of going through what the meeting or study session was going to look like. And that was, as a new superintendent, that was new to me. Coming from a principalship, those aren't things that I had to do in the past. And I also noticed that, because it was during COVID and because, things have changed so much in such a short period of time in education, that it was kind of intriguing to see the difference in each four and what resonated with them and what was, like I said, prioritized and what they felt was the most important work at the time. And it would shift. If you remember during COVID, it's like, we're going back to school, we're not going back to school, we're 3 feet, we're 6 feet, we're, so many different nuances to try to get everyone back. So I found it to be exciting. I found that the more time I spent with each board president, the better communication obviously we had, and really try to work on aligning what our purpose was as we move forward.
But your starting point was really getting to know the board president.
Absolutely. Right. More so on a personal level, right? Trying to understand, where they came from, their background, ask them, why volunteer to be a Board of Education member? I mean, in Michigan, these are, at least in Bloomfield, they're volunteer jobs. And, I give a lot of credit for, people that volunteer to be on a board.
They're not
And
only volunteer jobs, they're difficult, time consuming jobs, right? So
beyond time consuming, so I flash back before COVID and, think about, my interaction with board members, tough job then. And now believe it or not, I would argue it's much more difficult with all the things that have gone on since we shut schools with COVID and just the demands of their time, the expectations of the community are much more, requires much more time than probably even previously before. So yeah, definitely kudos to anyone that is on any type of board that's willing to volunteer and give up their time. And I find this to be one of the most important boards because education is a very serious business. It's serious because we're talking about kids. And the decisions that we make or don't make have an impact, whether negative, positive, or somewhere down the middle. So it is really important that if you are on a board of education, that you do put in the time. And I was, really proud of our board members. They really put in the time to make sure they can move the district forward as best as possible based on the information they had to make decisions.
So what are the 2 or 3 or 4 most important lessons you took away from working with these 4 board presidents?
Right. So, if
You mentioned
had
getting to know them well was important. What else?
right. So we always, sometimes, we go back and say, well, if I could do it a little differently, I might. And I would do it a little differently. And hindsight's always 20/20, and I understand that, right? But you make decisions based on the information you have at the time, and you move forward the best you can. I would have spent more time focusing on governance. As soon as you get to know people, that's great. But it's really important that, there's 7 board members and there's myself, 8 of us, that we really have understanding of what governance is going to look like, how we're going to operate, what we're going to do, what we're not going to do, and really get everyone on the same page. It was something that was on my to-do list. I had a long to-do list of things, but that's something I would prioritize upfront heavily, because I think that when the governance is in place and everyone's moving together, everyone's rowing at the same time in the same direction, things go a lot smoother, and it solves potential misunderstandings. It improves communication and provides more stability and a clear direction for the school district. Otherwise, sometimes when there's a crisis going on, you seem like a rudderless boat, just kind of in the ocean, just kind of going with the waves, and you don't want to hit up against the rocks, right? So that's something I would prioritize. Obviously, like I said, first, you really want to make sure you get to know people, get to know the board president on a personal level. Then after that, really coming together as a team and focusing on governance and how we're going to lead together.
Well, let's turn to the board as a whole. The board is your collective governing body of the district. How did you go about building the relationship with the group as a whole? And what lessons did you learn about board superintendent relations?
Sure. So quite a few different things, right? So I worked with the board, whether it was one-on-one conversations, whether it was in small groups. We did a couple of different retreats. We worked with some various different consultants on kind of forming a plan, but we kind of jumped around, right? So like, oh, let's try this. Okay, that's a great taste. Now let's try it. It's like, I would compare it to like ice cream. There's so many flavors when you walk in the ice cream shop. Sometimes you just need to pick one and it's a good one, and then follow it all the way through. So we kind of hopped around quite a bit with what we would want to do as far as governance. And then something would come up, we'd put it down, we move on to the hot item at the time. And then we found the need to circle back, we pick it back up, work on it, another hot item will come up. So really seeing it through and being committed to the process. And I think that, again, like I said, a couple of minutes ago, provides that stability, it provides that direction. We're all working under the same expectations of how we're going to do things. And I think with any organization, though, those are really key to establish and become part of the culture sooner as opposed to later, regardless of the outside circumstances, global pandemic and all the other things that, were going on at the time.
So you mentioned one-on-one meetings. How
Yes.
often would you say, on the average, you met with every board member individually? What was your schedule, if you will, for one-on-one communication?
So it was a minimum of quarterly with the non-board president. And then it was as needed. During the global pandemic, we met, it seems like almost every day. I believe we had 43 board meetings in 52 weeks. So we met quite a bit during that time. But outside of that, definitely quarterly. And they would bring with them the key things they wanted to discuss.
You mean individually? These
individually.
are your one-on-one.
These are my one-on-ones, yes, individually. And then if there was something that was a large update or something I felt they needed to be brought to their attention immediately, I would schedule small group meetings so that they understood what was going on, especially if we were releasing a large communication about something that could be considered controversial, just to make sure they got a heads up. And then I would share that communication with them 3 or 4 hours before it went out to staff in the community. So they weren't blindsided, they weren't surprised. And I found that to be a very successful approach. And it was great that the board members would always make themselves available for these small group meetings outside of our one-on-one quarterly meetings or ad hoc meetings that needed to take place because something came up and they want a clarification on something.
How much time would you estimate you spent on direct interaction with your board over the 3.5 years? On the average, how much of your week on the average did you devote to governance matters and specifically to interaction with the board? What percentage?
So percentage, probably 40 to 50%. If you consider communication via email, text messages, phone calls, meetings, preparing for Board of Education meetings, easily 40 to 50% of my time was spent doing that.
Well,
Yeah,
So,
busy.
well, what it means, I suppose, is that you did make the board a top chief executive priority, right? 40 to 50% of your time.
Right. But I would have been, I think we would have been better served if we had more of a structure in place of how we were going to do those things. Right. That's what I mean by that governance piece. How are we going to operate? Who's going to run, what committee here, what committee there, just so that, again, everyone doesn't feel like they have to pick up the ball and run with it. We would have everyone know that, hey, so and so is kind of the leader of that for the board, and they'll handle it, they'll bring stuff forward. So everyone doesn't have to take charge of every item that comes up.
So I think you've jumped ahead a bit, which is great. My next question you segued into, and that is, of course, we never really have it the opportunity to do it over again. But if you did have that opportunity, what would you do differently the next go around in building a partnership with the president and the rest of the board?
Well, let me start by saying one thing I would keep the same is just, those individual one-on-one meetings and spending time to get to know people. I think it's important to get to know people on a personal level. We talk about in education, people, we talk about students. They don't care how much you know until they actually know you care about them. And so I do feel I built some really great relationships with, the board members. I still talk to several of them via text, went out to dinner with a couple of them. And I believe these will be people I stay in contact and will be lifelong friends. So very appreciative that I've been able to build that friendship as well. I think that's great. But after that, I would prioritize governance and really having a structure in place so that there's no confusion, there's concrete direction of how we're absolutely going to do everything. And then as board members exit and new board members come on, just having an onboarding process for them so they understand the governance model that we do have. And they're able to, learn, adjust, ask questions, and be part of it. So it's more of a seamless transition. I think that is one thing I would do different. But I am, beyond grateful for, the experience I got to have and the incredible students I got to work with and serve. And just overall, it was wonderful. But I always like to learn from things that happen. And so that you can be a little bit better next time. No different than a teacher, right? I think back to my early days teaching. If you had me first hour on a Monday, your lesson maybe was pretty good. But if you had me seventh hour after I've taught it a couple times and made adjustments, wow, you really got the top of the line lesson that day. It definitely was improved. And I do feel, I grew as a superintendent each and every day. And, one thing I stress with everyone I work with in every position is that growth mindset, and that you're either getting better or worse as an organization and as a leader each and every day. And so every day you should strive to be self-reflective and look on how you can do better and move forward. It's not a negative. I see it as a positive because no one knows everything. No one knows the best approach. But over time, you kind of pick up some of those things and tricks of the trade, if you will, that will help kind of make you even more successful than you've been.
Now, I want to circle back to this question of structure. When you use the term structure, you're referring to, I assume, things like the committees you employ to carry out the work of the board, that kind of thing. Is
correct?
That what you mean?
Correct. I think it's really important for the board to be really involved. That they're just as responsible and they have to answer to the community. What I didn't want, and which I didn't have, I was grateful for. I don't want to just bring materials and say, here's this, it's 150 pages, just check yes, sign your name, and we're good. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine, right? I'm looking for more of that partnership. And, if we had set up, some of the structure, especially with committees that were a little more tightened up, earlier in my tenure, I think that would have provided even further benefit for our students and for our staff. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about the students. It's really a difficult journey for students with everything they have to go through, the impact that social media has had, and they're really counting on us as adults to get it right. Right? They get one time to go pre-K through 12. That's it. They don't get to do it over. There's no second chance. They only get basically 1 year in every grade. So although we did well in so many things in Bloomfield and there were so many successes, I still think we left some successful stories on the table, so to speak. And if we had really had those committee structures really tightened up, we could have actually moved faster, done more for our students.
In a sense, I suppose you're talking about developing the board as an organization. And what
Correct.
you're saying is, my next superintendency, I'm going to pay more attention earlier to the question of developing the board itself.
Right.
In terms
That's
of its
step
structure and its role, that kind of thing.
Right. So I think of it this way now. It's like buying your first home, right? And you get into a starter home and I want to redo the landscaping. I want to upgrade the kitchen. I want to finish the basement. I need new carpet. I want to redo the bathrooms. I need a new HVAC system. You need all these things. You can't do everything at once. So you need to prioritize. So priority number one is going to be building those relationships, spending the time to get to know each and every member of the board. What makes them, tick? What are their passions? What made you want to volunteer for one of the most difficult volunteer jobs in the world? Like what drives you to do that? And then, having early on, even before day one, set up that we're going to move to a governance structure. Let's talk about what that looks like. Let's talk about what the commitment means. And then let's talk about how that's not only going to be good for the organization, which is fine, but more importantly, how is it going to be better for our students? How are we going to be able to better work as a team to serve our students? Because the sooner we can get things done that are beneficial, the sooner that positive impact can be felt by our students and by our staff.
Well, Pat, I've got a closing question. You'll be happy to know, seeing as it's Saturday morning.
Right.
Time for you to have a little bit of a respite from work. So what would you advise senior administrators who aspire, what we call superintendent aspirants, who aspire to reach the top spot in the district? How would you advise them to prepare to work with their first board when they do take the helm?
Wow. One of the first things if you're aspiring to be a superintendent, is I would start looking at the different governance models to see, first of all, it has to be a good fit for your personality and for who you are and what your core values and core beliefs are. That way, when you've done that research and you see the different models that might be out there, you can see where it is you want to go when you reach that position. Being a superintendent is an incredible opportunity for anyone. It's also a very important position, again, because you're making decisions that directly impact your students and your staff. And what you say carries a lot of weight. And it's important to understand that. It's a lot different when you say something and you're a superintendent than if you were not a superintendent. And I'll kind of leave it at that. And so people really take it to heart quite often. And so by doing that research and knowing ahead of time what governance model you feel most comfortable with and would be most beneficial, and knowing the reason why, right? So if I'm a board of education member and someone came to me and said, "Hey, Pat, as a new superintendent, great to meet you, great to know you. Here's the governance model I think we should move to for the board." Well, I want to know why. What else have you looked at? Why are you so passionate about this one? Where have you seen good results? Are there districts that are like ours that are using this and it's been successful for them? I want to make sure that, if I'm the Board of Education president or on the board, that the person I've hired to lead the district really has those answers and has really thought that through and is passionate and committed to making sure the model works and see it through all the way.
So you're saying one of the most important things the superintendent aspirant could do in preparing to work with a new board is master this field we call K-12 governance. Understand what the models are, what the new techniques are in this area called governance, basically the work of the board. Any other things you'd advise them to do other than build their governing expertise?
To be themselves, to be true to who they really are. I think that, you know, there can be a lot of stress in the position. People already know that are aspiring to be the position. And then hold true to your beliefs. You know, if you really believe something is right, or you really believe that something is best for students, and you know, you've done your research and you know, you've lined up all the things that make sense to continue to move in that direction, because it's important to be true to yourself and, you know, to really spend that time working on behalf of the students. And the last thing I would say is that at the end of the day, while yes, I was the one employee of the Board of Education, the only employee, that I felt ultimately my responsibility was to the students I served, and that they were really my true boss, as far as I needed to find ways that could serve our students. And there's so many varying needs in school districts, right? There's no one size decision that fits all. Give you an example that going back to, you know, COVID, when we shut schools, when we did come back, we ran 3 different schedules. We ran one that was K through 5. We ran another schedule that was 6 through 12. And then we ran a third schedule that was for our students with disabilities, that actually got them in school more than anyone else, right? And so, you know, again, that was a very proud moment for us as a school district, because we were really looking at how do we serve, we're most accountable to our students, and what can we do? We found that running 3 different schedules. I mean, our K through 5 was, you know, half days. Our 6 through 12 was, you know, every other day, but you didn't have to come. If you didn't want to, you could remote in. And then our students with disabilities was 4 days a week, full days. That was the only group that was in school 4 full days a week, right? So I would say that that's important to realize. It really is about the kids. And I know everyone says that, right? No one goes into any job in education and says, I don't really care about the kids. I'm just here to serve the adults, to make the adults happy. No one says that, right? So I get that, but you can lose focus. So many things are going on at the superintendency level that you always have to bring it back and look at, how is this going to impact our students? What is it they're letting me know? What is it they're sharing with me? What are their needs? How do they feel their needs can be met? And then prioritize that over adult needs.
You know, it's interesting. One of the things I hear you saying, I think I heard you say, is that you not only need, before you work with the board, you not only need to have a good grasp of the business of governing, you got to know it inside out, obviously, or you can't really be successful as a partner with the board. I hear you saying also, you have to have a lot of self-knowledge. You have to understand or re-examine your own values, your core principles, the things that really motivate you before you choose the board to work with. So preparing to work with the board, I think you were saying that. You correct me if I'm wrong. And I think that's really fascinating, because that's a different twist. You're saying you're not just offered a job by a board, you're actually choosing to apply as a superintendent for a particular board, for a particular district, a job in a particular district, which means a particular board. And you've got to choose well yourself. And part of that is knowing yourself.
Right. It needs to be a great fit, right? We use this word fit and we throw it out there all the
Right.
time in education. But I did my due diligence before I even applied for this position. I had been at a previous district for 26 years, in one building, and just, still love the community, built lifelong friendships, relationships there. So I did my research on, A, should I apply? And B, who are the 7 people that I'm going to be working with? And do they really fit my personality? Do they fit where I believe education should be moving? And, over the years, had opportunities where people approached me to look elsewhere and they weren't good fits. And I definitely wasn't going to leave the situation I was in where there was, it was like the best of everything, to leave and go someplace I didn't think could be a potentially a good fit for me. So, yeah.
Well, Pat, thank you so much for taking time on a Saturday morning to talk about the board superintendent partnership. I wish you a pleasant weekend and
Thank you.
a great, productive, and satisfying week ahead.
I
Meanwhile,
appreciate it.
you take care, and let's see here. Let's make sure. Here we go. Take care, Pat.
You too. Thanks, Doc.
Bye.